Hey, just so you guys know, I'm in Walla Walla, so I'm not going to be talking too much. I'm going to be mostly listening.
Are we live?
Just one moment.
Hey, just so you guys know, I'm in Walla Walla. So I'm not going to be talking too much.
Okay, well, now it is 6:01. I'm gonna call this Lacey City Council work session to order. It's Thursday, April 14th, 2022. Do you have any changes to the agenda? Can you get motion to approve?
Move to approve the agenda as published.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? And the motion unanimously carries. We have an agenda. First up on our agenda is our state legislative session review. How's it going, Brian?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and speak in person for the first time in over 2 years, I believe. Yeah, so it's a privilege. I have some slides I'm going to run through. I've got an overview of the accomplishments in our legislative agenda, as well as some statewide perspective. With me is Chief Amata, who's going to be helping on the police reform pieces and filling in a level of detail and expertise that I can't provide. And then we'll come back and I'll finish up with some comments and questions.
Great.
Thank you. With that, I'm just going to go ahead and jump in. Just as a refresher, this is in your packet. This was approved prior to session. This was our legislative agenda. We had several priorities focusing transportation, capital budget, and some policy areas specifically around homelessness and state leadership and dealing with some of the issues on DOT rights of way. I believe you're all very familiar with this, so I'd like to continue to just go right in and specifically address them item by item. But also, just for the members, this is the first time I've spoken. Do I need to speak up? I need to, okay, I want to make sure I'm not yelling, but I also want to make sure.
Do you hear okay online, Councilor Vasquez?
I can hear you okay.
Great, fantastic, thank you. I'm going to start with, I think what was arguably the primary issue of the session, which was transportation package. This is something that we've been leading to now for, at least the last two biennia. I think heading in, it was generally conceived that it would be unlikely that a new revenue package would pass. Largely that was based on precedents of the legislature not taking large tax votes prior to an election year. And what happened, quite frankly, was the majority parties found a way to craft a package that did not require a bond vote, which requires a 60% majority, which requires a bipartisan approach. And because of the unique nature of where we are in time, there was various revenue streams existing that don't traditionally, specifically the package is a $17 billion package. About a third of that came from the Climate Commitment Act, which was passed last year. Another large revenue is a one-time redirection of general fund money. And then additionally, there's around $3 billion in federal money. So that already gets you to 10. And then the balance of that was made up of some additional transfers from either the Public Works Assistance account or the model toxics, and then fees. So this is one of the first transportation packages that I've ever been part of that didn't require a gas tax. Okay. I think cities broadly, but perhaps not the city of Lacey specifically, but of course I don't want to speak for staff here, but we have not necessarily had to rely on the Public Works Assistance account for access to affordable capital resources. We have a good bond rating. That doesn't mean we don't value the program and don't utilize the program if appropriate. But I think that issue that many cities were concerned about is a little bit diminished for our purposes. Did want to highlight that within this package, there was a significant investment in transit. Specifically, Intercity Transit was one of the entities that received a direct appropriation for their, I believe it's the maintenance utility shed, and that was around $5 million out of them. But there is a lot of money that's programmed out that will be pushed out to local agencies through state competitive grant processes. So we're gonna go to the next slide here. Specifically, on our agenda, we did request that our delegation provide roughly $2 million worth of investment in the corridor from Nisqually, from Mounts Road through Nisqually. And we were fortunate to get, not everything we asked for clearly, but an investment that I will characterize as significant enough that we can move forward with meaningful work. And then we also have a state appropriation that we can identify as we're looking at other sources of funding, specifically from federal government. So we did not get the full amount that we asked, but we were able to receive a fairly significant down payment on the project. And quite frankly, your delegation has done a lot of work to get from not on the priority list to being funded. I think we had some internal conversations where, we weighed the pros and cons of a package moving sooner than later. Of course, we didn't publicly lobby to have it slowed down, but there were conversations about, if we have more time to get us higher up in the priority, we would be advantaged. But I think we should feel pretty good about the work we did in the last, 18 months to get us from not really on the radar to get to some level of funding. As I mentioned, the package was not without challenges. I've been involved in the legislature for over 20 years, and this is the first time that transportation package hasn't been a bipartisan issue. And I think that has some impact statewide. It also, beyond the direct funding that we received, which of course we're very appreciative, there isn't a lot of meaningful funding for city transportation. So for TIB or FMCID or some of those other local transportation grants where we're traditionally used to seeing opportunities for investments in maintenance and things of that nature. And as I alluded to before, the utilization of the Public Works Assistance account, again, perhaps not necessarily a major impediment for us moving forward, but it is just a reflection of kind of where we're at in terms of relationship between cities generally and the state, and it's not a good reflection.
Well, don't you have to, what I've heard coming out of the legislature, in particular about this transportation package, is for us to not look at it as a traditional transportation package, right? This isn't something that they've just done this year, and we're not going to see in their transportation package for years to come. This is more of taking advantage of the surplus and so on and so forth to get a couple of key priorities.
Supplemental.
It's basically just a supplemental. And what I've been told, especially from the chair of the transportation committee, is that don't look at it. This is just a typical transportation package. So I don't think it's maybe fair to classify it that way.
I would say that your observation is on point on that. It is definitely not what we have traditionally seen. And since it does not utilize or rely on bonding, that there is opportunity, and it does not utilize additional tax resource. There is certainly an opportunity to perhaps revisit a traditional, in that context, transportation package in a shorter time horizon than you would see the normal 6 to 10 year period. So I think that's an astute observation, Mr. Mayor.
Questions now? I know Councilmember Vasquez has her hand.
Sure.
Just a quick question for context. What does the Public Works Assistance account normally fund? What type of projects at the local level does that fund? So what are we what are we losing a little bit of when that funding source gets swept to support transportation?
Yeah, Scott, generally it was an opportunity to get a loan for a transportation project, which were low interest loans. So you're borrowing money from the state at a very competitive rate.
Yeah, so
Infrastructure.
yes, it's typically a loan program, not a grant program. You typically don't want to take out a loan for transportation because there's typically not a source of revenue to pay it back. So it's more, although it is used for transportation, it's more beneficial for utilities. It's an option to bond it, and it's low interest.
And so smaller communities would like to take advantage of that if they're wanting to improve their sewer capacity or water lines, and it's a source of revenue that may not have the bonding capacity to actually pay for. So there's a way.
Maybe replace some meters.
Anything like that. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And a smaller jurisdiction might not have the bond rating or the ability to access capital in the way of cities such as Lacey or cities 50,000 or larger. So, great question. Oh, that's why. I was clicking on the council member, not the presentation. So, in addition to the new law revenue and spending package, there was an underlying supplemental budget. And one of the main items I wanted to highlight for this community specifically was in the existing budget, there is $3 million for Department of Transportation to provide assistance to locals for the cleanup and maintenance of DOT rights of way. This budget increased that amount by $5 million to a total of $8 million. So there is now $5 million additional for the Department of Transportation for maintaining their rights of way with respect to homeless encampments. Specifically, $2 million of that is dedicated to addressing litter. So I know that staff obviously worked with DOT last year in the initial appropriation, and will continue to make sure that we are first and foremost on that list and that program moving forward. So
I'll just say real quickly, we have a draft agreement that we've been going back and forth with DOT to access $300,000 for direct costs related to that. So we'll get that finalized here pretty soon.
When you say direct costs related to that, do you mean costs we've already incurred?
Yes. Some of it can go back. It has to go back to the last biennium. So last July, we can't go further back than that, even though we've been dealing with this issue since October of 2000. So it's 2021 of July 1. Yeah.
2020.
What did I say, 2000?
Yeah,
You know
it
what?
just feels like that.
COVID, there was this little time war, but I'm talking about, yes. So yeah, we can go back 6 months from last year and then going forward. So that would include either police response, litter pickup, like from Public Works, and related costs.
So how's that gonna work? Is DOT expecting to use that money and hire people directly to do the cleanups, or are they expecting it to be like on a reimbursement basis through counties and cities for them to do it, which would be
That's a good question.
not cool?
So in our case, I think they're different for each jurisdiction, but it's gonna be our direct costs related to policing of the right of way and cleaning of the right of way.
I'm just talking about for litter and so on and so forth. I mean,
Yeah, I'm not sure about the main line. That's a different issue.
So I do think there, as we were talking about a little bit before session started, DOT had halted the litter cleanup from the fog line to the shoulder. That work will resume and it has resumed. I wanted to make sure I didn't misspeak, but yes, my understanding was it has actually already resumed. And so that should be, that should help out as well. On our list of priorities is to create affordable housing and address homelessness. I did mention the cleanup already. There wasn't, we'll talk a little bit more about this later in the presentation about some of the policy that didn't pass. But there wasn't a lot of policy in this arena this year. However, there was funding. So there's a continued and increased effort around rental assistance, quite frankly, and then transition assisting and the operating budget, and that's hopefully to stem the tide of people entering homelessness. And then there's a significant investment in the capital budget. When you add all the money together, it's close to 400 million. And that's for the broadly either the construction or the acquisition of additional low-income housing. I think there's some opportunities here for the city moving forward to work with Commerce. I know that we've entertained various notions of what the city can do, and there will be capital available, as I mentioned, for construction.
So it's on a competitive grant basis, or how's that can be dispersed?
Competitive grants. But that's 200 million to purchase and move forward with housing projects in the next biennium. Now, capital does often get reappropriated, so it doesn't have to happen, but that's a lot of money that the state's looking to push out. If we have something that we can move forward, I never like to make any promises, but I like our chances, is what I would say. If there's things that we're ready to go on or want to explore.
Well, that's been identified by the Regional Housing Council. I mean, I think there's a recognition of state funds as well as federal funds. If you combine that with the home fund, that would be the arena to take advantage of it.
At this time, I'd like to put a pause on my presentation. I think we have another presentation that we're going to pull up, and I'm going to push the mouse here over to the chief.
So Scott, while we're doing that, so we're not gonna try to address any of that or access any of that directly, only through the regional housing?
I mean, we could, but that was the initial approach because there's gonna be matching dollars, those type of things. I mean, what would be the best way to do it? It'd be large scale projects. I mean, that kind of makes sense. There's also requirements with state money that, I think we'd have to walk through too, so.
Yeah, depending on the source of money, HUD requirements and other things.
I mean, you could go for further discussion, but I mean, the initial thought was.
You know my level of feelings about the RHC, so I'd like to talk further about that.
Okay, well, good evening, council. Good to see you. Robert Almada, Chief of Police. Good to talk to you today. So we're going to talk a little bit about the changes in policing legislation that occurred this last session. So to really do that effectively, you need to go back to last year. So we had a lot of change last year, several bills passed, really affecting a lot of how policing is done here in the state of Washington. Some things of note, just to kind of call out, was House Bill 1054, which prohibited firearms of 50 caliber or larger from being used by police officers. Very broad language, and effectively eliminated our use of less lethal shotguns, anything with a bore larger than 50 caliber, which would include our 40 millimeter launchers of less lethal. Also strictly limited the circumstances when you can pursue. You had to have probable cause to arrest the person for a very small set of crimes that were allowable, had to have prior supervisory approval, had to be an imminent threat to others, and a number of other things, as well as operational. It makes it almost realistically impossible really to conduct a pursuit. There's a caveat if there's a reasonable suspicion of DUI, but that's also a very limited circumstance, and we don't pursue DUIs here in the city of Lacey. And then House Bill 1310, uses of force. A number of issues in that bill used a number of terms that weren't defined, including physical force. It could only be used when probable cause existed to make an arrest, prevent an escape, or to protect from an imminent threat of bodily injury. A probable cause is a large standard. That's a standard to arrest somebody. For detentions prior to this, and I'll speak to in a few minutes, reasonable suspicion was the standard before this, which meant you could detain somebody while you conduct an investigation. As of this law going into effect in July of last year, you could not detain unless you had probable cause to arrest, which was quite an issue. There's no provision to allow for the use of force during community caretaking duties, such as a mental health hold, helping the fire department to contain someone having a medical or diabetic emergency who's acting out. A number of the things that we normally would do for community caretaking were just not allowed under that set of laws. Could also, again, I spoke about the reasonable suspicion also required considerable amount of de-escalation, and some of the language in de-escalation wasn't exactly clear. And so we asked for clarification on that. Just kind of looking at calls for duty, and this isn't a direct relation of causality. However, it is kind of let you know how police activity is occurring in the city. We had a lull during COVID, then we had COVID release, the conditions of COVID, the restrictions of COVID released, activity started increasing. The legislation was probably played in this as well. So we're definitely seeing an increase. Looking before this at a 10-year average, we're averaging around 108 calls a day. If you look at on a 10-year average. So we're starting to tick up. Just to look at things. So we're really 4 key areas we really ask the legislation to look at, because you can't fix everything, you can't have everything addressed. And we do agree that some change was needed. So we want to be reasonable what we asked for. So we asked that they look at less lethal tools, so we've been able to use those for de-escalation and not to use lethal force whenever possible. We asked for a definition of physical force. This request was bolstered by the AG's opinion that said, yes, they definitely need a definition of what physical force is considered. And to expand situations when we could actually use physical force. Like I described, the ability to do investigative detentions based on reasonable suspicion and then address the issue of pursuits. As a side note, the theft of motor vehicles in the state has increased by 88%.
Great.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Fantastic.
It's very difficult to pursue a vehicle, as I said. So we got 3 out of 4. So again, I really appreciate the work the Public Safety Committee did, appreciate the work of council to really get some of these issues addressed. Really some really thoughtful effort went into this. And it was definitely we really appreciate the fact that the legislature heard us on a number of these issues and listened to the public. So they immediately addressed the military equipment issue, meaning the 50 caliber reduction or restriction. They specifically allowed for the use of less lethal tools to come back. And that was, everyone agreed that's a good idea. We need to do that. So effective this week, we have actually brought back our less lethal shotgun, afforded them the launcher. We've trained our folks, we've re-equipped them. Those are all now back in service effective this week. House Bill 1735 expanded the authority to use force by law enforcement, including all the things we just talked about. Mental health evaluations, court orders, search warrants, judicial directives. Literally before this law was passed, if a judge said, take that guy out of my chambers, you couldn't do it because you weren't arresting him. So it was that kind of weird conflict. So that's where we're at. 1735 addresses that. Now the issue is 1735 created the shell of what we could do, but then House Bill 2037 defined the terms that were used in that bill, which is physical force, which is really important. This definition really goes towards what the Lacey definition of force has been all along, which is any act reasonably likely to cause physical pain or injury, or any other act exerted upon a person's body to compel, contain, constrain, restrain person's movements. Physical force does not include pat downs, incidental touching, verbal commands, compliant handcuffing, where there's no physical pain or injury. So all those things where they're compliant, turn around, put your hands behind your back, handcuffing, that's not a use of force. Under the old definition, it easily could have been. So in our discussions with the Public Safety Committee, we said, what do you consider? And they weren't even considering any of this. They were thinking the worst case examples and think about the terrible things you see on TV and all the other stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, we're not even worried about that. We explained, you have to articulate that. And so they did, and we really appreciate the fact they did. The fourth issue we really wanted to address is pursuits. Senate Bill 5919 would have addressed pursuits. And there was bipartisan support, as Brian can articulate. However, procedurally, it did come up for a vote. And so we're going to revisit that in the next session, is really what it comes down to. And that's pretty much it. But basically, we had bipartisan support, and unfortunately, it could come up for a vote. So that's really in a nutshell what happened with law enforcement in this last session. It's a very quick and dirty look, but it kind of gives you the high points. Brian, is there anything else you want to address on that?
One question for you, Chief. So you said it had bipartisan support, but didn't come up for a vote?
Correct. So they would have supported it had it come up for a vote, but they didn't vote to let it come up for a vote.
So it didn't have enough support to get it up for a vote, okay.
Apparently, yeah.
I'd like to try this for you.
Me too. When is weapons training?
Well, I'm sure we could probably have a range day where we could give some familiarization training and kind of give you an idea of how we de-escalate
Awesome.
and use different tools. So I can sort of
We
say
have a
that.
liability waiver I'd like to talk to you about. I'll sign it.
Did they address the reasonable suspicion, like standard of proof threshold problem that you mentioned?
Yes, They did address that. I'm sorry if I glossed over that. They did address that. We are now able to detain based upon reasonable suspicion. We can use force to enforce that detention as long as we meet all the guidelines for physical use of force. That being de-escalation has to meet a reasonable standard of proportionality standard.
So besides the pursuit issue, is there anything else from the original set of laws that are really still concerning to you?
The pursuits are very concerning. Literally, there's a number of things that we consider violent crimes. It's not considered violent crimes under the code, or we would want to actually apprehend somebody immediately. You start speaking about Amber Alerts and different things and reasons for those. You'd be very hard pressed to conduct a pursuit based upon an Amber Alert or those type of circumstances. So there's a number of things we need to address with pursuits and frankly apprehending dangerous people.
The way it is currently, chief, what can you actually pursue for that? I mean, you can still for a violent felony, I assume?
Certain violent felonies. Some things you might consider a violent felony or the standard person on the street might consider a violent felony, according to the code, doesn't meet that definition. So it's a very small set of what is in code identified as a violent crime. And you have to have probable cause to arrest the person in the car. You have to know it's that person. You can't just say a guy in a green car, in a red Mercury, just, it's all dated.
So they didn't address that at all then, so it is still probable cause,
yeah,
it's
so
not
that
reasonable.
has not been
Oh,
changed.
okay.
And you have to have, that's the guy, I've got probable cause to arrest him, that's the car. Oh, supervisor, do I have permission to do this? By the way, he's speeding away, made 4 turns, he's out of my view. Well, no, you can't chase a guy you can't see. How's that gonna work? So procedurally, even if you have all the stars aligned, it's almost nearly impossible effectively to make it happen.
Did any police officers or police departments get shown in violation of the rules that were passed in legislation? I know there's a lot of concern.
There's a lot of concern. I can
But
tell you
was-
that I had an officer in violation of our pursuit policy for 27 seconds. Well, he was trying to figure out what he had. But technically, he was in violation for 27 seconds. And so I had to write him up for a violation of policy. And for me, that's retraining to address the issue. But that's the problem with the policy. You have to make a perfect decision based on imperfect information in a very short span of time. So it's an incredibly difficult standard to meet. So answer is yes, more than likely. Now,
Well, we did that internally, but would be afraid that if you went and pursued the person, that the person could get off because we didn't follow the policy exactly?
no, that wouldn't be the problem. The problem would be the outcome. So you expose yourself to liability, you expose your agency to liability, you expose the city to liability, and you risk your certification, meaning that you can no longer be a peace officer in the state of Washington. So that's the penalties, lack of, you lose your certification if you're in violation of these laws, whether it be failure to report, failure to intervene in the use of force and in excessive use of force, or engaging in an unauthorized pursuit.
Can you?
But you haven't heard of that penalty landing yet.
No, it's
Like on-
interesting. That has not been the case yet because they're still creating the umbrella in which they're going to do that. CDC, actually, I went to a webinar recently with CJTC where they were discussing the new commission, how the structure, how they were going to vote on new policy to do that. But they really don't have a timetable for that yet, or how the policy is going to be laid out.
Just elaborate a little bit on what it means to pursue somebody, because it sounds almost like, you know, you don't have your lights on, you're just kind of following to see if you've got something, so that's reasonable suspicion, right? Or, I mean.
Well, I can follow you as long as you're obeying the traffic laws, and I'm obeying the traffic laws. We're just 2 cars motoring down the street.
Right.
I happen to be in a marked police car. Now, once they start breaking traffic laws, now, and I've activated my emergency equipment, and I need to start doing the same thing to keep up with you, now we're in a pursuit. So now I have to meet all the criteria, and I have to have permission before I engage in that pursuit. So technically, as soon as you start breaking laws, I've got to wait for the permission for the on-duty supervisor.
That's crazy.
So, but can you take the license plate and then later find the individual?
This is a rare circumstance when they're not driving a stolen vehicle. So the plate information is not going to go back to the person driving the car
Got it.
in most situations, or they've just taken off the plate altogether. People rarely do crimes in their own cars unless they're really disordered thinking.
Well, let's keep going. We're gonna be getting beyond time now.
Great. I do want to emphasize the chief's remarks. It was a Senate bill sponsored by a Democrat that passed the Senate 3118. Went to the House, did have some changes, passed the House 86-12, went back to the Senate for what's called concurrence, and then it was not brought up for a vote. So that is what, when he says it's bipartisan,
It's really bipartisan.
it's really bipartisan. Those were the vote counts out of each chamber. So I didn't want to share that with you. So great job, Chief. Thank you. I'm gonna just click through these since we've covered them. All right, so we were very successful in our capital endeavors. We put forward two somewhat maybe not modest, but appropriate size for a supplemental budget request. And we were fortunate enough to be successful in both of those endeavors. I want to specifically highlight the work of staff on the 103,000 for electric vehicle charging. And by staff, I mean the legislators' perfect personal, their staff, finding a way in for what I would call maybe a square peg to fit into a round hole. And they were able to do that and find the kind of the right color of money to fund that request, and very appreciative of all the work they did to support us. We were definitely well cared for by our delegation in these endeavors. And I know that we're going to be recognizing their efforts next week. But I did highlight, well, that was not just an easy process on that particular piece in particular. Lots of great support on the Oxford model. I think for all the obvious reasons. So I'm very excited about that.
So how soon are we gonna access that money and put those in place?
Typically, the money comes available about mid-year, but we'll still need to find a provider to execute that model. But we have enough money to secure a home, which typically an Oxford model is typically a residential environment. But then we need the right provider to be able to provide the ongoing services for it. And we talked about this. We have a model that is, I think, working in terms of response, but we do lack resources. And so we're trying to figure out how to get capacity in that arena.
So, and I don't know,
Because couldn't we add some of the other state grant money that was just passed along with this money to do a bigger project?
Good, but again, we'll still need a nonprofit
Sure,
to do the
sure.
operating stuff. Yeah.
But might as well think about it in those terms and.
Get
we're
2
gonna-
homes.
Yeah, 2 homes or 3 homes, whatever.
great. So I think in totality, when we look at our agenda, I think it was very much in line with kind of the esprit of the esprit of closed session, which was more of a there's resources available and how do we allocate those resources, particularly the ones for how do we reprogram those federal dollars and can we push those out into ways that support our communities. We were successful in those endeavors. It was not a very notwithstanding the police reform policy, because that was clearly very meaningful and significant and a lot of work. Beyond that, there wasn't a lot of policy pieces. I have highlighted some other bills here. There are, I do have, my list that I've sent to staff. It's still 13 pages, so plenty of activity. But by and large, this held a little truer to a supplemental session in years where it wasn't kind of tectonic or meaning like massive shifts in policy in a 60-day session. I did want to highlight 1329, which is a bill as it pertains to public meetings. There's a lot of pieces in there, quite frankly. Some of it is about how we move forward in a hybrid environment that has some permissive pieces that we like, but then there's also some regulatory pieces about what it means to provide comment prior to you acting as a legislative body taking action. I know that staff is working on this and will likely be coming forward with some recommendations here in fairly near future. So more to come on that, but I did want to highlight the
Question. So the second bullet point there. We allow public comment at all of our regular council meetings on things not on the agenda. Does that change that?
Yeah, Dave, I was gonna ask the same question.
Yes, it did change that. And so we'll be presenting council with some recommendations. And there's certainly going to need to be an opportunity for public comment at most, on most agenda items at all council meetings. There's certain exceptions, quasi judicial hearings, et cetera. But yes, it definitely changed it.
That's
So
kind of
let's
what
say
it
we
looked like.
decide to make a decision on one of these agenda items, then we'd have to have a component for public comment.
So there'll be no more decision making at a
Work session.
work session then.
That's not necessarily true.
But so you could, you have to. allow public
We're
comment.
working on that. Work sessions are regular meetings in Lacey, and final action can be taken. We just need to make sure that we're going to provide an opportunity for comment if that is taken. And so staff's going to be working to make sure that if we anticipate that the public's going to be aware of that ahead of time.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
I don't want to wade into your, so I want to be careful, but I just, comment is, they will work, and comment has opportunities there within what it means to provide comment and when it means to provide that comment.
When you say opportunity to comment, is that not what a published agenda does, or are we talking about something sort of deeper than that? Because we publish the agenda on the website, right? And
Yeah,
so-
but typically, we publish the agenda and we haven't allowed public to comment
On the item.
on the agenda. They've had to have commented prior to that. Now,
There was public comment on things not on the
Yeah.
agenda at our meetings.
now, we've never, if someone comes and they really want to talk about something, it's the emergency, we've
Yeah.
sort of have let them, so it's not, yeah. Okay.
And then one other item with respect to this space, there now is a prohibition on open carry at city and county council meetings, election sites, and school board meetings. That's an expansion of the existing prohibition in courthouses or other areas. So I did want to highlight that for you. That was something that may or may not be an issue. Some other bills that we've been tracking, there is an opportunity for cities that have adopted housing action plan strategies for those strategies to then be exempt from the GMA appeals process and also from, I'm sorry, challenges from under GMA and also from the appeals process of the State Environmental Policy Act. So what the intent of the law is trying to do is really promote if the city wants to move forward with density or with opportunities for low-income housing to have that happen in a more expeditious fashion. So wanted to highlight that. Also, the comprehensive review plan cycle has been officially bumped up from 8 years to 10 years. Have staff
That's a big
dig-
change. That's really good.
Yeah, you'll want to dig into the details of that, of when it actually comes place. It's based on when your comp plan is due to be renewed and things of that nature. But something I did want to highlight, there's some other bills that I will, continue to work with staff around, but around adding tribal consultation to either GMA or specifically tribal consultation to, if you're trying to access some of the Climate Commitment Act dollars. I know that Lacey's been a leader in that and is in front of the state necessarily, but it now is institutionalized in the state. And you might want to just compare what your current working policy is with those specifically on the grant request programs if you're looking for money out of the Climate Commitment Act. So wanted to highlight this for you. Just quickly, all cities are going to have to offer curbside composting. That's going to take, that takes effect. What do my notes say? 2027, January 1. I don't honestly, that it's too hard to interpret what that's going to do in terms of like cost or impact to, like a lot of folks are already doing it. It's a lot of it's built into the cost structure.
But the city doesn't provide.
Right.
Yeah.
But are we talking about separating foodstuffs from yard waste? So maybe have to be two different containers?
No, I don't believe so. It's green, it's the green composting. So the provider for the residents of the city will have to ensure that they provide that. So in all communities, I'm sorry, not in all communities, but there's a list of exemptions. The city of Lacey does not qualify for any of them. Most of them are based on size or either size of the collection area or the total volume of debris. But for a city over 50,000, the provider is going to have to ensure that they provide green compost. Long term, I think you can kind of, if you think landfill space is limited or things of that nature, by separating that out of the waste stream, perhaps reduce the demand on landfill space. And it's my sense that that cost is already, since so many communities are already doing that cost is kind of already built in, and it will likely not have an impact on your ratepayers in a meaningful way, but that's a little bit of speculation on my part.
Yeah, I'm not sure you're right about that because it's not being done here. So I would imagine that it will have an impact on our ratepayers.
Oh, absolutely.
It wouldn't in places that are already doing it perhaps. Like I think Seattle already does that as an example, but we don't have it here. So I can't imagine how it wouldn't have an impact on the ratepayer.
I think that's a very fair point. Yeah, I think it's certainly broken out too. I think that if you'll allow me the grace to back up, what I would say is the provider that is already doing that likely provides that service to some communities and does not have to fundamentally redesign their business. And so thank you
That
for
makes sense.
providing the opportunity to say that in a more articulate way.
In our case,
Thank you.
UTC would then require LeMay in this case to provide that service in our area.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's the way I would interpret it.
Which they'll then have to pass. I mean, there'll have to be a cost to the ratepayer. They're certainly not going to do it for free.
How many more
They're not a
how many more
nonprofit.
slides you got?
This is the last slide.
Okay.
So I think just looking
I
ahead,
get grumpy. but
Trying
later.
to keep the meeting on time here, huh?
there's going to be a flood of new members, including, we know for sure one of the 22nd legislative delegation members is not returning. So far, over 25 members respectively in the House and Senate have identified that they are either retiring or seeking a different office. So there's so if a senator, so some of those are House members that are going to pursue Senate seats, but a lot of those are folks just retiring or not moving on. So midterm elections, there's all the House seats are up, half the Senate seats are up. Those are the majorities currently. Remains to see what happens in November. So the big caveat is, with a lot of this, what I would call unfinished business, a lot of that is dependent on what happens in November. But if we assume, I'm not saying, but just here, there was a lot of things that were brought up this year that will likely be brought back next year, even if the majorities do change, but specifically if the majorities don't. Legislation that was sponsored here locally by Representative Bateman on missing middle and how to accommodate that. ADUs and other density issues, more of the same on that. There was a lot of climate or climate adjacent legislation that was brought up that didn't pass. And by climate adjacent, I'm like leaf blowers, gas powered public works equipment, things of that nature. There was also legislation around creating an energy reach code, which would create an aspirational code that municipalities could adopt above and beyond the state energy code that had some incentives in it. We didn't talk about this in the transportation, and I appreciate the mayor. We only have about a minute left here, if even that much, but to your point about this, the transportation budget, traditionally, when you pass a transportation budget, you have the things that you're funding, and then you have them plotted out on a 10-year plan or a 15-year plan for when you're going to get that money. So for instance, we received $75 million for I-5 corridor. Okay. We don't actually, it is not programmed out in time yet. that will have to be sorted out. That is a big issue that needs to be sorted. And then lastly, if you perhaps recall, when the Blake decision came out, and that's the decision around approaching felony level drug possession with a behavioral health response rather than a criminal justice response. There is a decision point that the legislature has to revisit. They basically said, we'll look at this again in 2 years. Well, 2 years comes up fast and it's coming up next year. So they have a lot more that they have to actually make final decisions on Blake. So that's the very, very early look ahead to next session.
You want to have any questions?
Elections have consequences.
On the transportation side of things, and I saw that I mentioned light rail, and I know that, you know, most counties don't have any light rail, so I mean, I guess the new one on Mercer Island that just got done, that's nice, and they're a lot richer than we are. Do you foresee any light rail coming, you know, to counties outside of King and Pierce?
No.
The big exception is Clark County and the I-5 bridge, which got about $1 million, excuse me, I just did $1 billion, not a million. That project's gonna land in the $4 to $5 billion before we're done, or even more than that. And there will be a debate about whether it's bus rapid transit connecting Clark County to Portland, or whether it's light rail coming from Portland connecting Vancouver. So that would be the one exception that I would see. So the mayor is broadly, is 95% right when he says no, but that the extension of the Portland metropolitan system into the city of Vancouver would be the one exception. And that is, we are still decades away from.
And that's
that.
$5 billion price tag just for that, huh?
This is envelope stuff, but
Yeah.
Washington's ponied up $1 billion, the feds are ponying up $1 billion, Oregon ponies up $1 billion, and then tolling covers the balance, and that's assuming today's project estimate.
But at least they finally got the money for the crossing. I mean, they've been pursuing that forever and ever, so that's a win for Washington.
Well, it's interesting because Metro is supported by payroll tax, so I wonder how that would align with Clark County.
Yeah, and there's definitely a difference, differencing various opinions in that region.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So next up, transportation calming policy discussions.
You guys almost match.
We try to color coordinate.
Public Works.
Yeah.
Blue shirts
They
and tan
text each other
pants.
at
Talk about it in advance.
Yeah, what are you wearing tomorrow?
Rick sets the benchmark, we try to get there.
Maybe a professional engineer. That's what it is.
The city manager's benchmark is way. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. So Roger and I are here to provide a briefing on the traffic calming policy. It's been around for quite some time. So a little bit about the history. It was developed back in 1993, 1994, based on, requests, comments from citizens. The council tasked Public Works to develop the policy underneath the guidance of the Transportation Committee at that time. So Transportation Committee had the lead. It did take over a year to develop. There's a considerable amount of work involved in it. Martin attended actually 2 different courses on traffic calming to assist, in the development. But part of it, they researched numerous communities that had traffic calming policies and incorporated the best elements of what they found into Lacey's traffic calming policy. And as you can see there, second bullet from the bottom, Boulder, Colorado at the time had the best. Important item there at the bottom, lessons learned from other cities in the process was not to use a simple majority of 50% in the decision making, but use a super majority of 50, because there's too many occasions that it's 50-50 split. And there again, it's Democrat, a democracy. So not everybody is going to be happy with the decision. And that's important to remember when you receive complaints from the public. Some are satisfied, some are not.
That was almost 30 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah,
They matured like good wine.
that's right. Curb and gutter's been around for about 100 years.
So we're just, this might be a little bit on the boring side. We're just gonna step through this one by one. So, first of all, this originate with, requests that comes from the citizens. And then Martin takes over, the Transportation Department evaluates the request to see if it meets the minimum requirements for traffic calming. And evaluate cut through traffic and diversion during that process. So there in the brighter blue box is the criteria that it has to meet. It can only be a 2-lane residential roadway. It doesn't apply to arterials. The goal is to slow the traffic down. That's not, that's not the purpose of an arterial. Average daily traffic needs to be between 300 and 3,000 vehicles. So there's a lower benchmark and an upper. The 85th percentile shall be greater than 5 miles per hour above the speed limit. So if the speed limit's 25 miles per hour, in order to qualify, over 85% of the vehicles have to be going over 30 in that area. And our speed limits on our city streets is 25 miles per hour. So we also need to make sure that traffic calming wouldn't hinder Fire District 3. And then sight distance is important for this. So minimum sight distance of 150 feet, roadway grades less than 10% are required. Placement of a traffic calming device will not result in an unacceptable diversion of traffic onto another street. You just don't want to chase one problem away from one area, moving on to the other. So, Martin and his crew go out and they do the volume studies, the speed studies to determine whether it meets the criteria. Those results are shared with the citizens or the neighborhood. If the study warrants the traffic calming devices, then options are presented to the neighborhood association, or group for a preferred alternative. So the diagram there on the right is one option that Roger, Martin, and I presented to Panorama City. They had a request on Slater Kinney south of 22nd Avenue. We presented them multiple options, and they basically picked. But we don't present every option because in some cases, some options really are not beneficial or can present almost be a hazard. So then, the results are shared with the Transportation Committee. And if the warrants are met to install a traffic calming device and the neighborhood wishes to proceed, the neighborhood boundary is established at that time, kind of like an LID. This is the limits of the project, and these are the properties that will have a vote. So then the neighborhood association circulates a petition, and the petition has to identify the pros and cons of the devices and identify the cost to the petition to install a temporary traffic calming device. And it requires a majority support of 60% of the voting neighborhood. Then the information is presented to the Transportation Committee for approval to install the temporary device. And then the city installs temporary device for a minimum duration of 6 months and then up to a year. In certain cases, as with Lebanon, we extended it beyond a year. So then typically upon completion of the test period, the ballot's mailed to the voting neighborhood. The vote to install requires a 60% majority, supermajority. Public meeting is held, which is typically at the Transportation Committee, to share the results of the test period and the outcome of the neighborhood vote. The results are shared with the Transportation Committee. If there are no adverse effects from the device and the neighborhood support is evident, the committee approves the placement of permanent traffic calming, and city share is paid from funds budgeted for the neighborhood traffic calming program in the next budget cycle. So Roger, did you want to have anything you wanted to add there?
No, it's really.
So how do you prove, so say they go into this process, you put up a temporary traffic calming. Then is the goals to do what, to get down to what levels acceptable and
Right.
transportation's mind for speeding.
To bring it back into the 85th percentile group of, literally most speeding, it would, if it's 25 miles an hour is the speed limit, and 85th percentile, shows them at 32 miles an hour, then the goal is to try to get them back between 20 and 30 miles an hour in that range. That's why we kind of war game where we're going to cite the traffic calming device and work with a whole myriad of details, driveway openings, et cetera. It's a fairly complicated process, try to make everyone happy with the device that you select and then they can live with. And then, does it meet the requirements? Does it bring the traffic speeds down to something that's reasonable? And that's what we look at. That's why we do multiple speed studies once the devices are installed to see if, they're actually performing as expectation.
So bringing it back into criteria doesn't mean it still requires a neighborhood vote. Not everybody supports it for various reasons. And, this is a picture of an elevated crosswalk that wasn't not installed as part of a traffic calming process. This was required. This is a golf course crossing. So there's, a high count of pets crossing there. So this was required as part of the project. But you wouldn't believe how many complaints and requests we've had to remove that from the people who live nearby because of the noise that cars make from their shocks when they cross over these devices. So since I've been here 15 years and we've only gone through the process twice, once with Lebanon, once with Panorama City. But prior to that, I was made aware of a time that we went through a process where temporary speed bumps were installed and the neighborhood didn't want that. They did not support it. And I've got further information here on Lebanon, if you're curious on the comments that we received from the people that did not support it. And, yeah.
Seems like a pretty thorough process.
Yeah.
And a fairly, I'm guessing fairly expensive, because you've got a lot of staff time doing all of these studies. We've got, engineers and people having to do all these studies to see if they truly meet the criteria. I mean, this is, it's pretty extensive system.
We have an activity node chart here. We'll show you all the discrete activities that went into the Lebanon interfacing with the community. And then actually the activities that we did, and then of course to get us to the outcome that they elected.
Sure. This is the number of activities, how much time we spent with Panorama City there. Every one of those little dots is a meeting, or excuse me, Lebanon.
Yeah.
Every one of those dots is a meeting?
Every one of those was a meeting. So, and then those aren't our misspellings. That's how the information came in, but they were.
Yeah.
So
that one comment as well, doesn't affect me. They slow down by my house. It sucks to me.
Yeah.
If you live anywhere else.
yeah.
So first of all, I didn't realize there was an HOA over there.
There's not.
There's not.
Our HOA voted it down, so
They,
talking about people not knowing what the heck they're talking about.
Right. They tried to work as a collective group, and we would interface. There were about 7 or 8 active participants, but they quickly dissipated once we got down to the nuts and bolts of it. We would kind of like drag 2 of them or 3 of them in to help us out with this, because we needed somebody to kind of carry the water for us on the street.
Right.
You just didn't want to turn it into just like the city's pushing this on you now.
Yeah. And
So reason why I brought this up, the one part of the policy where I felt it needed to be looked at was the cost of doing these calming devices. And from what I heard from even a couple of people that says don't want the cost, it didn't feel like it was a good policy where, say, maybe 60% of the people in the area wanted it, but they didn't want the cost to do it.
Right.
And I didn't want that to be the reason why these things aren't going through, is because you get into a poor neighborhood where people are very, maybe on a fixed budget, and it's only $200, so it's $200. But if that's the reason why people are saying no, that's where I have an issue with it. You
Right.
know, I think.
But let me ask you this. So what is the council's position on forcing something on these people that don't support it?
Right.
Because, you know, there are a couple of those, but, you know, and then also everybody wants something for free.
Sure.
But a lot of people here don't want it regardless of it's free or not.
That's exactly the
So,
rub, you know, you basically have enough comments to not justify going to the trouble of forcing the public to deal with this new calming device that's permanent. They clearly don't want it by a majority, so what else are you supposed to do?
And-
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that not necessarily always be the case, right? You might not get to quite 60%. You could get to 55%, 58% there. So well, you don't have 60%.
Yeah.
That's more than a majority. And if the reason why they say it is because we don't want to afford it,
Yeah.
that's where I have the rub.
So
Yeah.
I mean, I think we can all appreciate, you know, say a financial hardship,
Mhm.
and then maybe you consider, you know, a subsidy for that person. But this specific LID, or this, not LID, excuse me, this specific study, it didn't meet any of those criterias. And the reason that the council supported moving forward with it and not charging them to do this study, because if it warrants it, the neighborhood needs to agree to share in the cost of the temporary. There were no costs there. It was just that there was this perception that if you connect Lebanon to the Lebanon extension, that it's going to add cut through traffic here and increase speeding, which it didn't meet the criteria before, it didn't meet the criteria after. So, you know, I mean, so yeah, what you mentioned is a consideration, but also it doesn't even meet the minimum criteria. And I'd like to point out that what we've experienced is there is typically a difference between perception and reality. Speed limit, neighborhood speed limit is 25 miles per hour. That sounds slow, but it's not slow. You can take a good amateur cyclist who's pedaling as hard as they can, and they're not going to sustain 25 miles per hour on flat ground very long, and they're moving. So in case in point, White Firs is a residential area up in Northeast Lacey that came to council a number of years ago with a petition, speeding, cut through traffic, all this. And we did the study, and it didn't warrant it. And one of the police officers was out there talking to one of the people who was complaining. He had a speed gun, and a car comes down the street, and the person was complaining, look at that one, it's speeding, it's speeding, it's speeding. And the officer took his speed gun, and it was doing like 26, 27 miles an hour. So perception versus reality.
Sure.
And then if you look at our collision maps, very, very few, very rare to ever have a pedestrian collision on a residential street. And so, I mean, we really try to provide good service, and we try to make it fair. You know, we work hard with these neighborhoods. With, you know, Lebanon, we left that in an extended period of time. I think it was closer to 2 years. You know, the vote period ended. It was not in favor of installation. So we were asked to ask them a second time.
So
they were asked a second
is it
time.
Is it 60% of the people voting, or is it 60% of the houses that go along
The
street?
people that vote,
The people that
that's what
vote.
we're asking, just the people that vote.
Because so the other concern was like the person that has to make that decision is the property owner, right?
That's correct.
And a lot of those are renters, and so the property owner doesn't give a crap, right? And it's not gonna vote. So it's like, what does he care? He doesn't live there. And so there's another part of the issue I have with it.
Well, it's actually on our map, we indicate the ones that are homes that are rentals, actually in that color coded map.
I think you have to use the homeowners though. You can't, I mean, renters change
Sure,
too
no,
rapidly,
I-
too often. I think you have to
No.
stick with the property owners.
I mean, that's pretty good representation there, honestly.
Robin has her hand up.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Robin.
Just a quick question. You know, we developed this policy 30 years ago. Perhaps some things have changed, but when you were doing the research or even since then, are you aware of other jurisdictions that don't do this sort of cost sharing practice the way that we do it? It reminds me kind of the way that we fund ULIDs, or what we've talked about ULIDs, but are other cities just funding this out of a traffic calming budget without requiring the homeowners that live on the street to pay half?
Yes, it depends. More wealthier cities actually have a set aside budget. I use Bellevue as an example. They have actually a traffic calming team. They have a set aside budget for traffic calming, but their operational budget's $1.2 billion a year. I think the last time we looked.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, that's a little bit, you know, let me give it a little bit. But there are cities, the more fluid cities have a set aside budget for traffic calming.
Bellevue has speed bumps all over the place in their residential areas.
Yeah.
A lot of money.
Okay, well, like I said, the reason why I want to talk about this was because, one, I feel like if it was the example, and maybe in this case it didn't prove it, maybe it didn't prove out to be, but if 55% voted and it would have been 75% that voted, but they didn't want to pay for it, they couldn't afford the additional cost, that didn't feel right to me, which is why I wanted to talk this through.
It's an interesting dynamic with the subdivisions, because we've done a lot of these. Like say Scott has mentioned it. I'll use the Rumac example, which went almost 4 years in Rumac. We tried all types of techniques. They came in, they said, we went through the process with them. They said, we want speed tables first. So we installed speed tables. We ran them for about 14, 16 months and they go, we don't like speed tables. Give us something else. So we go to basically twisted diverters. So we install those. We run those for 14 months. They didn't like those. They voted the whole thing down. We spent almost 4 years with them. And the end result was they couldn't even get 40% affirmative vote on this. And
You
with
spent a lot of
Lebanon,
money if you went through two different.
yes, it was.
You know,
And, we have to
processes
adjust them
too.
and maintain them. And, but we're trying to accommodate them. With Lebanon, we sent the first letter out to ask for their vote with a basically all they had to do is fill out the card, mail it back. It was already postage approved. And we got like a 30% response on it. So we met with Transportation Committee and said, we need to take another run at them. So we wrote a much more directed letter to the folks that didn't respond, said, this is really important. We've had these systems out here for, almost 2 years and we need your feedback. So would you please vote? And, the card's attached. And we actually ended up with a little bit higher voting.
And a couple of council members went out there and,
Yeah.
and they'd had people, they say, hey, you said you wanted to address this, please vote. And they had other, and some of the neighborhood people going door to door. For me though, we try to be accommodating. Like this is Panorama, Slater Kenny. That was one trial. We also tried speed bumps. They didn't like these. They didn't like the speed bumps. And it was actually the third trial, which was basically bulb outs at the intersection of Slater Kenny and 22nd.
What is it?
Bulb outs. So it narrows.
Tightened up the
road.
intersection, made it more narrow
But-
right at the stop sign.
And at the same time, as much as we, want to provide, high quality of living, the people that do this, we also design and deliver projects. Martin and Roger just spent the last several weeks, a considerable amount of their time working on the consultant that just submitted for the $16 million raise grant. And so, how much time should we spend, going from option to option to option in a neighborhood? And especially if like Lebanon, where they didn't meet any of the criteria that would even elevate it to this to begin with.
What made you go forward? So, that's my question would be, if it didn't meet the criteria, why'd we go so far?
It was
Just trying to make
it was
people happy,
to
basically.
satisfy they had the perception that when we opened up the Lebanon Street extension,
Right.
that everybody was gonna want a shortcut through the neighborhood. And I will tell you, it's, again, perception. That one of the meetings that we had with the neighborhood of all those, you know, that you saw was in the executive boardroom here. And I can't remember the name of the traffic officer at the time, but he was there in with us. And one of the neighborhood residents was saying, there is so much cut through traffic that they're leaving Ruddle and they're driving from Ruddle through our neighborhood, which if you go through there, it's a very meandering course to save time to get to Lacey Boulevard. And I drove both routes, and, you know, if you're gonna speed, you can speed on Ruddle and Lacey Boulevard a lot better than you can speed to a neighborhood.
Right.
You know, with.
So you did the traffic counts that,
But I
not
mean,
a lot
if-
more traffic went up,
if-
not a lot more speeding was there?
No, but in this case, the police officer, God bless him, said, where are these people coming from? You know, are you telling me that they're doing this? Well, no, but they're coming from a block away. So aren't those your neighbors? No, they're not on our street. So that's what we face.
Right.
And I'm not over exaggerating this one bit. That's how that is. So we try to be fair. We think we're being fair. We think this is a good policy, that it's always worked well. But we represent the people that oppose these things as much as we represent the people that support them.
Absolutely.
And
Hey, Scott, if I may.
Yep.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think this worked out the way it was just gonna work out, regardless if you're for it or against it. The city went way above and beyond the call of duty on this one, if you will. You know, you're correct. I did exactly what you did. I sat down there for a couple hours over the course of, you know, what was it, over a year this has been going on. I know the residents. We even try to get more of them involved personally, because a lot of us know them personally. And it's just the way it worked out. And some are going to be upset and some aren't. But I think the policy is good, even though it's 30 years old, being you know, of age. You know,
63, still good.
yeah, 3. I mean, yeah. But it's just the way it works out. And some people just aren't going to be happy, and some are going to be happy. And but we did everything we could possibly do to appease everybody, regardless of which side of the fence you're on. And that's all we can do, you know, honestly.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for the update.
You just mind if I put a final touch on the cost, or the cost issue? And so if, just to your point, you know, if it is a situation, a matter of cost, and we don't want that to be a deterrent, if you take the 3 people on the list and you put them over to the other side of the people who voted for it, you're at 58%. So you're just edging on, so you're at 58.33%. So if the cost deterrent is removed from the equation, then you might get a greater majority based on that fact.
Which was my whole point all along. I just didn't want the cost to be the one. When you got down to the whole end of it, they said, you know, they met all the criteria, it's the traffic, it's working, so on and so forth, but they couldn't afford it. That's when I had the problem. And so,
We can look at it in a hardship case, you know, like that, but the only thing I would add is that I would say if it doesn't meet the criteria, you guys went way beyond what you needed to do. And my only advice, if it didn't meet the criteria, I wouldn't have gone anywhere near as far as you guys did, so, thank you.
any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You can't fix
I'm curious to see what 300 trips are too. See, 300 trips on a street seems like it's. You have to have at
it.
least
A
3.
lot or a little to you?
Seems like a lot.
See, I was thinking that too, but
It's like you have to have at least 300 trips, but if you're on a little street and you're, anyway.
My neighborhood's been dealing with
I
it
was also,
for the 15 years that it's been there, because
what if
Dallas
after
Street,
after the calming devices were moved, then they realized, well, that really did help. So, and like, you know what I mean? Because I was thinking about that when we were talking
Come
about,
back
like,
and think, "Can you put it back in?"
yeah, like, you know, hey, wait a minute, we didn't realize how much of a help that was.
Yeah.
So 30 houses, because the average daily trip load of a house is about 10 trips, single family house.
It's what, 3? Is the
10?
average
10,
family?
yeah, 10 is the average daily trip count, estimate for
Maybe.
one single family
10.
home.
Yeah.
So
Maybe that was pre-COVID.
well, this is,
Well, now that we're post-COVID, it'll start going back up again. If we're ever post-COVID.
all right, well, good evening, council. I'm here tonight to talk about the Lacey Makerspace. And also some exciting news about the Makerspace with the possibility of expanding based on the EDA grant that we received last year. This presentation was made before the Finance and Economic Development Council Committee, so this could be a little bit redundant for some of the members of the council, the members of that committee. But again, I want to kind of go through some highlights of the Makerspace, what we've seen over the last several months, and then talk about a little bit of our future plans and needs as a result of expansion and popularity. So just as kind of just a quick recap of the Makerspace, since its opening, we have about 120 members, 67 current active. And it really kind of got off to a good start. However, if some of you remember when we launched the open space for opening, it was, I think, around November, December of 2019. And then we went right into COVID. So we ended up having to shut down fairly quickly. But we did maintain some memberships through that time. But the other value of that, I want to remind the council and the community, is we had enough interest in the Makerspace and volunteers that Makerspace actually pivoted and started making PPE devices, shields and some masks, if you recall. And that was at that very front end of that pandemic where there weren't masks and supplies available. And so that demonstrated to all of us what a great community resource to have on not only the best of times, but when you have to react to some type of situation. So as we move forward, we kind of maintain things through COVID, but as we're starting to come out of COVID, we go back to June 1st, we saw a kick up in membership and interest in the Makerspace. And so that's also about the time where we started with our new Makerspace manager. We also started publishing some online trainings, as well as started opening up some specific classes during that time.
Is it a monthly membership, Rick, or is it an annual membership?
There's choices. You can get a monthly membership. The general membership for a month is $50, depending on your, whether a student status, retiree, or military, it can be reduced to that. And then you can also buy an annual membership at a regional. So basically, I think it's around, it's basically 10 months for 12 of you.
So $500 or whatever, get you 12 for the full year.
So we got a bump up in membership. So now that 69 remain 54 still active. So when I mentioned the 120, that's kind of the general number that we've been maintaining as people drop their membership and people come on. We've been maintaining that kind of model. Of the membership, the makeup, we have 21 that are female, 98 that are male, and a non-binary report. So it's kind of also something that shows some good interest. It's like to see a little bit more balance in those numbers. However, we do have some interest from women as well as being makers and using this space. The other thing that we didn't really, we're aspirational on, and it's kind of proving the point, is the Makerspace is not just serving the Lacey community or Thurston County. It's actually starting to serve a broader geographic area. We're getting people, makers, as I show on the slide here. From that membership, we have members that reside in Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater, but also Tacoma, Tenino, Yelm, Roy, DuPont, Kent, Lakewood, Puyallup, Chehalis, Spanaway, and Aberdeen.
That's a jaunt.
Yeah, but also too, this is the only type of space like this in the whole area. When we first started, we were trying to figure out how to program the space, and of course we were using Fab Lab up in Tacoma, which was a privately developed makerspace. As an example, we also consulted with them. They have since closed down being open to the public, and I don't know if they're still in operation, but I know they transitioned to fabrication only. And so they actually closed down. So the closest makerspace to the north, I believe, is still in Auburn. And that is actually more of a Parks and Rec program versus a makerspace setup such as the one here in Lacey with all the resources that go into it. And so we're seeing a nice little ripple effect going beyond the region and providing opportunity for entrepreneurs, makers, as well as workforce. We also this last year hosted a training for it's basically construction site 101 for second chance type of individuals to be able to get training on what to work on the basics of a construction site so that they can now try to transition into a career and that second chance on life. And that was coordinated through Pack Mountain Workforce as well as Thurston Chamber Workforce. And we are actually able to host that training at the Makerspace. So it kind of demonstrate too that it can be that training resource. Also, when you talk about businesses that come out of it, I'm going to highlight a couple of businesses really quick. One of the things that's very nice being on St. Martin's campus as well is it's accessible to students. We have this is one business that has come out of the Makerspace, Genevieve, who was a student at St. Martin's University. She started a wedding event planning business, and she makes a lot of her centerpieces and favorables for events at the Makerspace using the 3D printers or the laser engravers, those type of things. That's cool. This next business, O Sophronia, is a business developed by Bethany Hanna, another student, started working in the Makerspace. And what she does is design jewelry. And you can see the earrings in that picture. She uses resalvaged wood, refabricates them into earrings, but she also puts a tag on the back of it. And that tag can be read by your phone, and it will populate a Spotify playlist as well as websites. And she uses this for highlighting significant or important women in history as a women empowerment program. I've talked to Nathan, our floor manager at the Makerspace today. He mentioned that she probably spent about $3,000 in materials and time at the Makerspace using equipment. And when she made her first batch of supplies, went to a weekend festival concert and was selling her wares and was immediately successful and made somewhere around $20,000 to $30,000 in that first weekend. So again, it's an idea that somebody had. They figured out how to make a prototype, and then they were able to turn that into a business, and that all happened here at the Lacey Makerspace. So I just want to kind of do a quick recap of some of the funding that has gone on in supporting the Makerspace. The City Council has been a significant supporter of the Makerspace since its inception, and really do appreciate that support. Over time, the City Council has, I shouldn't do math on the fly, about $445,000, $510,000. But anyways, as over the years provided money to help pay for a lease space to secure at the initial location at Zabro Hall, purchase initial wave of equipment, about $90,000 worth, and then most recently allocated $350,000 for operations. And with that $350,000, the intent was to fund operations for 1 year, 2020, and you would commit the second year of funding in 2022, year 3, if private donations were developed that in between year to match. And during that time, we were able to secure the match with the Betty Trust Foundation, who also donated $150,000 to the Makerspace for training and programs and curriculum and operations. And then we also have additional community funders that provide monies that make up the difference with MGR Development. Nisqually Community Givings has provided funding 2 years in a row through their program, SCJ Alliance, Former Construction, and the Perry Shagan family. And then, of course, we all know just recently we got the $1.2 million EDA grant. And that was a huge success. And now we're able to purchase equipment that will go to the state of the art and really enhance the opportunities at the Makerspace for getting training and use of state-of-the-art manufacturing equipment. But with that, well, I'll talk real quick. Here's the basic categories of that equipment that we'll be purchasing with that $1.2 million grant. So we have the industrial fabrication, your water jets, CNC mills, routers, and
That's cool.
prototyping, resin and carbon fiber 3D printers, a desktop CNC mill. In fact, we just purchased that first wave, and there's one at the space now. And that desktop CNC mill is a 5-axis mill. And so if you think about most equipment is on a 2-axis basis where you
Oh, wow.
move side to side and up and down. With the 5-axis, now you can start doing concave and convex type cutting, those type of things, and really, develop a more sophisticated prototype. Metalworking, technology with the computers and software, because again, with CNC, you need to have the computers and software to be able to train people how to develop those programs. Basic carpentry, because that's where the training starts. Your finishing products, electronics, and textiles and workshops. So those are the type of categories that we're looking at programming and purchasing with that $1.2 million grant.
So is that just recommendations, or have you actually made those purchases in the parentheses or the?
Those are just examples in that category.
Okay.
I just wanted to kind of, put a little fine tune, and the top line, industrial fabrication was one of the larger cost items. And that's that bigger equipment that the CNC mills are your stand-up large 5-axis. And those are the things that require, of course, 3-phase power and is that state-of-the-art equipment that may not be accessible for a lot of businesses as well as people to train and use. So that could be a resource to our local business community as well.
So do we have this money? Are we actively looking for the?
Yes, this is all with the $1.2 million EDA grant.
Yeah.
And so with the grant, we have this equipment purchase list that was been approved by EDA, and we'll be over the next 3 to 4 years purchasing components of that to acquire it. But, as a good segue, that is the challenge that we're facing now, because as you've been in the makerspace at Zavro Hall, we're only in about 3,500 square feet. We need space to accommodate this equipment. And also that space, right now we're making do, but you have woodworking, you have electronics, you have these things, and you have dust. You got to try to figure out how to, have some,
Yeah, it's all
separation.
kind of compact in there. You got all these different resources and tools, but yeah, the dust and people bumping into each other, that's gonna be a pain in the butt, so.
Right, and so with we've been working as the executive committee on the makerspace, working with St. Martin's and as well as EDC, trying to figure out an expansion plan. And we do have a expansion strategy. So St. Martin's University has agreed to start to look at relocating their facilities department. That would free up the remaining portion of Zavro Hall. So the makerspace could actually take over the entirety of Zavro Hall,
What's the square foot of the total square footage,
about 9,600 square feet.
Okay, so like almost triple the size.
Yes, yes. And of course, St. Martin's University is raising funding in order to do that. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But this is a floor plan that we developed using local architect and builder to kind of get a sense of how we can program that space and master plan it, so we get kind of a cost estimate, so we can start looking at what the raising funds. So as you look at the screen, this phase 1 area is basically the existing makerspace. As your front doors are right here to the south of the building, you walk in, you go in, and here's the work area. So that first phase of improvements is really because we need to get power to the existing activities as well as air quality equipment and compressed air. So the first phase of the equipment is going to be just that, is starting to put in power drops, mechanical equipment, and for air filtration, and then compressed air lines, and putting a compressor on the outside of the building. That's roughly going to be about $150,000 for that first phase, but we're looking at it in the context of the overall master plan, so we're not doing any throwaway work. Second phase is then once facilities relocates, we'll be able to expand into the facilities area. And then that's where we'll start getting your separation of uses. So we'll have your industrial metals location up here. Your woodworking will still maintain in this area, a better storage for a tool crib. You also work over here, and you got the digital lab. This is where you have your computers and tech equipment, electronics. We'll have a larger area, multipurpose for classroom space, but also will be flexible for other type of events, hosting socials or happy hour fundraiser type things, whatever that could be. Office space and a larger entry area with the internal hallway. And so that would really start establishing that as a training center, as well as access to the hobbyist, the maker, as all aspects, all audiences we're trying to capture with this. And then of course, phase 3, that would be the third phase, and that'd be the expansion off of the west end of the building, about 20 feet, another 1,600 square feet. And that's where that industrial equipment, I mentioned the CNC, the mills and the water jets, that's where that would be located. Part of that equipment, such as it's so large, is you're going to have reinforced concrete and you're going to have it anchored to the ground. So that makes a lot more sense versus going in and try to rehab existing.
This is gonna be amazing.
So we did look at options, and we have their options, and there's an option not to have this additional physical expansion, and we looked at it, and in order to accommodate that larger equipment, we probably would have to locate it in the engineering lab of St. Martin's campus, which would work, but then it's still not that as accessible. And so this made a lot more sense to have it all in one place. Or if we kept it here within the existing footprint, we would lose some of that classroom space in DigiLab, which again, that's the other piece of what we're trying to accomplish, is not only opportunity for entrepreneurs and businesses, but also workforce training.
Yeah, I think that needs to be a component of the workforce training. 'Cause I mean, I think like what you did with that basic construction training as an example. There's gonna be a lot of people needing retraining. People need to change paths right now. There's a lot of people on paths that aren't gonna be a good future.
I'm hearing a lot of feedback from individuals that are in the have manufacturing businesses, do fabrication, and they say, we do get hire people that have great technical knowledge, but they don't have the hands-on experience. Or we have somebody, but we have to train them, but then I have to take a lead out of my shop offline.
Yeah.
Certain more.
They would pay to use this facility to train.
And then you run the risk of
people.
training, is that person going to stick? And so this provides that opportunity to have that all function here so that people that want to find that. Now, this will be partnered with South Puget Sound Community College. They have an advanced manufacturing program, as well as St. Martin's University with their advanced engineering program and labs. But one of the values to the students is while they're in their class, their classroom labs shut down at a certain time, they still have the opportunity to come to a space and still do things after hours. So it provides a lot of flexibility. Before I move on, any other questions on this? One other thing I did want to mention too is we do need to reach out and continue to talk with our workforce trainers like Pack Mountain, Thurston Chamber, our trades, to get feedback and input and also participation in that as well.
You think that third phase expansion is gonna be big enough for the long term?
With the equipment, we're looking at pitching it with the
I know.
granite.
Yeah, but
That's what we're looking at.
But are we gonna feedback in like 2 years and say, geez, I would wish that would have been?
3,000
Well,
instead of 1,600.
Ultimately, I'd love to have a lot more space and flexibility, but again, that's a great segue because let's look at the price tag from this expansion.
Yeah.
So we're looking at estimated about $1.2 million for that, just over $1.2 million. But we had to sharpen pencils to get it down to that, to think that that's something that we could realistically fundraise. So that first phase I mentioned was 145. The second phase is around $415,000. And phase 3, about $660,000. And that's in today's dollars. And again, with an estimate from a local builder, that's we worked hard to get those numbers down to be reasonable. So part of that too is facilities has to move. So that's a cost of St. Martin's. We're looking at potentially renovating, I think it's Harn Hall, the Fish and Wildlife building that is being vacated. We're looking at facilities there. So facilities is really trying to be accommodating for the space.
Are they expecting the makerspace to help with that $250,000?
They're raising that on their end as part, because when I look at 1.2, that's really just a makerspace expansion, but it's really more of a 1.5 project if you think about the facilities.
So they're raising that part on their own. That's gonna be kind of their contribution to it.
Right.
It's fair. That's great.
And so then on the funding request right now, we have $100,000 from the Cheney Foundation. That's been approved. They awarded that to us 2 weeks ago. This is another significant piece I just want to highlight is the Cheney Foundation is out of Tacoma. And my understanding from talking to Cecilia, this is the first time they have awarded any type of funding outside of Pierce County. But what they saw was the value of the uniqueness of the space and the reach that it has going beyond just our community or Thurston County. So again, that's I think good testament. Then of course, we're looking to maybe use about $300,000 for the city's strategic investment reserve to help fund expansion of space. That might get us more into phase 2. Part of city funding would be also $200,000 for 2023 operations. Because one of the challenges we have is we're burning through cash in a sense as a startup, as an organization, trying to raise money for capital expansion as well as operations. We want to make sure the doors can operate while we're getting this expansion and kind of getting it over this hurdle. And then of course we are working with our federal lobbyists, and we're making a congressional ask to our delegation, Senator Murray, Senator Cantwell, as well as Congressman Strickland's office, for also getting $1 million appropriated to the space over the next year. So we're already have that request in with them, and I know Congresswoman Strickland has been aware of the site and then acknowledges it.
Rick, so the way it's phased out for the 3 phases, would it be able to stay open and continue operating during these expansions, or would there be a long downtime in there?
We would be able to do the work in phase 1 at night. So that would be able to keep it open during the day. When what we thought would be is once facilities leave, we would be able to start doing a lot of the prep work in phase 2 before we start. There's going to be a point in time we're going to have the space down for a certain amount of time. But we can start a lot of the work at the beginning of phase 2 in the empty facility space before we interrupt the existing space of phase 1.
So with the expansion and more eyes are gonna be on this facility, we have interest in Pierce County, we have interest in Lewis County. I mean, it's huge. Is this space going to be adequate to meet the ensuing demand that's gonna be coming for it?
Well, it's going to get us further on the map. It's going to get us our attention from our workforce, more from our workforce partners. And because the other thing too is we're still trying to make sure that we can fund operations. So even though the space, concerned about how big the space and how fast that may be outgrown, we still got to focus on bringing the operational dollars in and making it attractive to those workforce dollars. We're also have had some conversations with folks up north, nonprofit called Ajax. They're an aeronautical journey apprentice training program that they're part of the workforce programs up in that area, and they have worked traditionally with Boeing in training and providing certificates for aeronautical manufacturing processes. They have interest coming down and expanding that area, partnering with our local workforce providers to provide that, because what the value is, it brings a certificate program with them. And if we can establish that, then that creates a lot more value in our advanced manufacturing. And so we're trying to make sure we can create that interest as well, so we can create that ongoing funding and have a diverse funding income besides just membership, city out dollars, as well as just general fundraising.
So
I could see us trying to find a bigger facility after about 10 years, where we're gonna need a lot more space. That's why I asked that question. I'm just curious.
The other thing is just the parking over there. You can fill up that parking lot pretty quick.
Yeah.
Is there plans to expand the parking lot too at some point?
Right now, our focus is on the space.
Sure.
And make sure that space. And we looked at the parking issue, and the nice thing is eventually we'll have the area where facilities has fenced off, where employees of the makerspace and loading would be on that side and visitors on the other. But also we'd have a part of our partnership with St. Martin's University to be able to have people park elsewhere on campus in certain lots to be able to access, especially for more events or classes. Eventually, we're going to run into more of that problem. And the idea would be is as we grow, we'll be able to either continue to expand on that site or find another location when the time comes. The great thing about it with, in St. Martin's University campus is you have that influence of the school and the students there. And it also brings people from the community on campus, and creates a better relationship between the university and the community. And then as we work towards the 7th Avenue intersection, the roundabout intersection, all of a sudden now you have a direct line into the Midtown and over to community college. Now you're going to start seeing a lot better flow of that interaction.
So do you have an ask that's come in before the council? I mean, I know there's
But right now, the ask right now is at $300,000 towards the remodel or tenant improvements of the building and $200,000 for strategic investment. That's what we're planning on doing, and would bring that forward as a budget amendment. Unless the council had any concerns or questions or want to discuss that.
That's why we have that fund.
Like a
I
worthy
support it
investment.
for sure, yeah, I think this is completely a worthwhile project.
Absolutely.
We have the money, and that's
Agreed.
perfect for that money.
Great. Thanks.
You know, so there's one little bit we may, continue to keep you apprised on how we, work with the congressional request. But, any opportunity you have to champion, appreciate it.
When I met with Congresswoman Strickland, we talked about this and, the other two, our federal delegations aware of it and seem pretty supportive. So I feel like we have a pretty good opportunity.
And at the state level, the legislature approved funding for a small business innovation fund that's being managed by Commerce. Commerce is going to be developing the criteria for that. But I had the opportunity to actually schedule a tour of the facility with Director Lisa Brown. So she's aware of that to the fund. So eventually, once I get a rule set up, we might be able to have that as another source.
And there's a ton of workforce development money and bipartisan infrastructure legislation to the bill that we could probably qualify for this as well. So there's a ton of money in that.
Forgive me for asking this question, okay, but because of the business that I'm in, do we share title with these people on this structure?
No. So how it's set up is you have the Lacey Makerspace as it's being set up to be its own 501c3, but currently it's under the umbrella of the First State EDC Center for Business Innovation 503c status. So the CBNI is the fiduciary and the treasurer on the committee. You have St. Martin's University and the City of Lacey as the other two founding partners. When we set it up with the first funding support by the council was for the initial lease. So we entered into a lease with St. Martin's University for that portion of Zavro Hall, and then turned around, subleased it at no cost to the CBNI and the Makerspace. Now, as we're moving forward, that lease agreement will be directly with the Makerspace, CBI, and St. Martin's, but we're still there as a founding partner and funder for the program.
That's not very clear.
What is it? What? Is there an advantage of becoming its own 501c3 or why don't you stay under the EDCs?
Well, it's one of the very nice things about the CBNI and their partnership is they're actually providing a lot of in-kind staff to manage the books and all that audit. And at some point, the Makerspace needs to be its own and develop into its own 501c3 and board. But as it sits right now,
So have they said that, like, at some point you guys need to take this over?
It's always been the plan. When we first started setting it up and we were trying to.
Because as long as they're willing to do it, we're just let them do it.
But also we need them to do other things and have capacity there too. So, but it was a plan to have it is separate, and they stepped up and said, we'll cover it until we are able to get it up on its own feet. So.
Great. Yeah, I want to add too, it is
You have to leave the nest at some point.
it's a great engagement with St. Martin's University, and it allows the public to engage St. Martin's University and their talent, especially with their professors and staff. And then it opens up a window or opportunity for our business community that we talk about with workforce development. So there really is a lot of potential in this partnership. So
I think you lose a lot if it grew to the point that it had to be moved off campus. I think you lose a lot. I think it's really valuable having it on the campus.
It's in right where it's at too.
And there's a lot of support and understanding of that within the community of St. Martin's University to this place.
We should probably put a bug in St. Martin's ear that this is gonna grow and we may need a bigger space. So think about that in the next 10 years.
When does St. Martin's plan on possibly moving? Is that totally contingent upon them raising the 250,000?
I'll know more the next 2 weeks. They've made substantial strides in raising the money. So it could be as early to start that process in May.
Okay. The reason why is because we have the money to buy the equipment. We can't buy the equipment unless we have the space, but we need the space.
We still have to get funding because those phase 1 and 2 is going to be around 645, and right now we have 400, and we still need funding to raise. So that's the other piece too, is how do we?
But we got the 1.1 million for the equipment, so.
Yep.
Got it.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Agenda item.
Okay, so,
I won't jump over. I'll get to
So Shannon and I are gonna bring this one home. So hopefully you have on your calendar, April 28th as the council retreat. Obviously, a very important time of the year to talk about priorities and direction for the city, especially from council, from a vision and leadership standpoint. As your city manager, this is helpful for me to just get clarity and priorities, and especially important coming after COVID and having 2 years of somewhat of a malaise and all the, I think, demand that I've put on the organization. This will help us once you have an opportunity. I know you met with Shannon and talked about priorities, but then collectively come together and figure out what the consensus of those priorities, so then we can find out if the organization has enough bandwidth and resources to actually fulfill those resources. So that is a really key component that we're hoping to achieve on the 28th. So I'm gonna have Shannon go through the components of the retreat. And then we'll kind of wrap it up after that. And if you have any questions, we'll go from there too.
Well, good evening, council, and I won't belabor this too long because you're going to be getting a packet with all of this information here really quickly. But for the agenda, I just want to actually first start off by saying thank you all for sitting down and having a conversation with me and starting this process. This will build off of this, as the city manager just said. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with a lunch, and this will be just more of a kind of sit down, come get some food and talk with other council members before the actual materials of the retreat starts. From that, we'll have the city manager provide a welcome the mayor provide a welcome, and then the city manager to provide a brief introduction. We'll go over, retreat ground rules and get consensus on that. Hear a little bit from you all about, what would make this retreat the most meaningful and pleasant retreats. We'll do a couple of icebreaker activities, and I'm not going to tell you what those are right now, but when the packet comes out, you will certainly be able to see in advance what
See
they
the
are.
excitement? I saw it.
You see my roll my eyes? Does you see me roll my eyes?
We'll come back to that and see if that sentiment changes after it's done.
I forget I'm in public sector realm. We don't play those games, but it's all good. I'll be a good sport.
All right. Well, we'll take a break after that, and I'll certainly be coming to you, Councilmember Kunkel, for some feedback following that.
You got it.
And then we'll jump back into retreat mode with a reflection and visioning activity. So this will be thinking about successes from the past, and then also looking at what a successful city looks like in the next couple of decades. And then talking about just kind of the process overview of why a work plan is so fundamental for the city moving forward. And then we'll really jump into the bulk of the discussion, which is a priority discussion, and then next steps. So preceding the retreat, you all will be receiving a survey here in the next day or two, just to kind of add a quantitative element to the qualitative interviews that I have done with you all, which will really want you again to see the whole gamut of ideas expressed by council members. And it's just ideas to select which one of those are your priorities. And then of the ones you've selected, it'll ask you to rank them. So we can get, again, a quantitative.
I need to go around and lobby my priority.
I'm saying you need to become prepared to have a discussion at the retreat, but please take the survey in advance of the retreat. So that survey will be coming out again in the next couple of days, and if you could take it prior to the next council meeting, that would allow me the time to make sure that it gets fully into the agenda packet moving forward.
And I believe we're going to try to get the packet out on that Monday preceding the council retreat. So that's April 25th. And then everyone have an opportunity to take a look at least what the general ideas have been expressed. And so we're kind of doing some preloading homework. So we're not maybe utilizing time at the retreat. So we're making a little bit more focused time. So kind of save some time on the front.
That's good.
Great.
That's it.
That is it for me.
Did you scroll up?
Oh, well, I can scroll down, and this was an added feature just here for the
Pretty good stuff.
Is that yours? Did you find that?
No, I just maybe
Oh, I
been
didn't
inspired,
realize.
but
I learned something about Yogi Berra. I didn't know he earned the Purple Heart.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
there you go.
yeah, I didn't know that. Anything
That's
else?
that's a great yogiism.
So we're probably gonna do miso in terms of lunch. Okay,
That sounds great.
all right.
Tuna.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. This
Okay.
is a
Oh, we
public,
get to pick our lunch?
Well, no, I think we just
Yeah.
kind of communicate what it was gonna be. Also, we are gonna be, just a reminder, we'll be in the council chambers. We're already set up for a hybrid meeting format, so this will be, seems like we spent such little time in this room in the last 2 years. It's
almost
gonna
like
feel-
going somewhere
It's gonna
new.
feel like a
Yeah,
retreat.
yeah.
You just didn't want to go rent something.
Well, we are saving money.
Oh, we could go to Mikado's, or Ricardo's.
So that'll be done hybrid as well, the retreat?
Yeah, we will have, I mean, people can watch in, but we're not gonna be basically playing to the cameras, essentially. Yeah.
Got it. Well, just as a public service announcement, tomorrow's the April 15th. Your council members, your F1 is due to the PDC. If you haven't gotten it in.
Done, thank you.
And with that, we've reached the end of our agenda. Without objection, I'll call this meeting adjourned.